Thank you for staying with us. Now, just like many other developing countries, Nigeria gets loans from the World Bank to fund projects that would improve the quality of life for citizens. But a major concern for many at this time is the country's continued reliance on borrowing and high debt profile. Nigeria's debt to the World Bank currently stands at a staggering 6 trillion naira. A figure the Debt Management Office says is nothing to be overly worried about because such debts are positive. The DMO says monies gotten from the World Bank come from the International Development Association, which assists countries fund developmental projects with very friendly repayment plans. Meanwhile, economists have warned that incoming government may face a debt repayment crisis if nothing is done to tackle the spate of borrowing amid low revenue. Joining us via Zoom from Abuja is a public finance and policy analyst, Olusegun Elemo. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast, Segun.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and good morning to our viewers as well.
Right. Help us understand what the Debt Management Office is saying. Nigeria's debt to the World Bank is 6 trillion naira, and the Debt Management Office is saying this is nothing to worry about. How so?
Well, I think to put it in context is to say that the Debt Management Office is
All right, Segun.
to raise, debt revenue, and for the DMO to say it's nothing to worry about. Yes, I think you put it in proper perspective. Where these monies are sourced from, there is a longer moratorium in terms of the repayment strategy. It comes at a lower interest rate. So the country prefers to engage such loan facilities rather than looking inwards for domestic borrowings, which sometimes comes at a higher interest rate and with shorter tenor for repayment. So really, essentially, it's nothing to worry about. But looking at 6 trillion, out of the total debt stock of the country, it's just taking a segment of what we're really should be concerned about. Because when you look at what has happened in the last 10 years, for instance, the country has continued to run a deficit budget, which meant that the financing is not sourced locally from internally generated revenue or internally mobilized resources. We have to constantly look at external and internal borrowings, and this is not far-fetched because our revenue continues to dwindle from oil. We maintain fat subsidy regime that has bloated and continues to increase over the last 10 years, and it doesn't look as if we've taken that headlong to deal with it and to take that leakage out of the way so that we can then scale revenue. Hopefully the new administration coming will be able grow. Since, for instance, 2014, we had 7 trillion. In 2020, as at Q1 2020, we had 14 trillion. In 2022, Q1, we had 20 trillion. And that's even, away from the ways and means, borrowing, lending that the CBN, provided to the federal government. And there's of course the issue about the CBN itself, flouting its own regulations that set it up. The law that set the CBN up. The CBN had gone beyond the cap that it should even provide in terms of ways and means, and it has provided as much as 18 trillion to the federal government. So this is just the domestic debt alone. And when you're not even looking at the external, borrowings. As at 2019, we were doing about 8 trillion. As at 2019, in 2020, we were already at 11 trillion. At our 2021 Q2, we were at 13.7 trillion. And as at last year, Q2 2022, we were already talking about 16.6 trillion. When you combine the domestic debt, Q1 2022, which is at about 38.9 trillion altogether, when you add the ways and means by the CBN as well as the borrowings from commercial banks, then when you now add the external debt of course, that now comprises of federal government and state government, which stood at 16.6 trillion as at Q2 2022. We are talking about 55 plus trillion as at 2022. We've not talked about Q3 2022, Q4 2022, and now we've ended Q1 2023. So it's an issue. But like I said, the sole responsibility of the DMO is to continue to manage this crisis.
All right, Segun, you have been analyzing these figures over the years, and like you have pointed that out, Nigerians are wondering because what they hear are the figures up there, and then the realities of what they face on a daily basis, especially from the window of inflation and liquidity and so on. Now, from your understanding, has there been justification for all of this borrowings and the rising debt profile that Nigeria is accumulating?
You see, in all honesty, I think there's been some justification. To really be fair to the government. You see, we have multiple issues on our hands. There's these development issues where we're talking about infrastructure deficit and things like that. We have the poverty problem on our hands. We have unemployment issues here and there. And so the government, I think the governance philosophy of President Buhari, is to look at whether in reflecting, its strategy to reflecting the economy was to, is to, address infrastructure deficit. And the government thought, well, if we're able to address infrastructure deficit, on the one hand, we can, provide some level of employment to our young people. And then we can also then attract investors into the country because nobody will come into an environment where infrastructure is lacking. So that is the philosophy of governance for President Buhari. And then in addressing that infrastructure deficit, he then went all out to say, yes, I'm going to borrow, but I'm going to borrow for infrastructure. And he did borrow for infrastructure. And when you look at what the Ministry of Works, for instance, had done over the last 7 years plus. Yes, they've indeed invested in road infrastructure. When you look at Ministry of Transportation, for instance, they've invested in rail infrastructure. And the last time you can look at it, look at aviation, the airports are, taking shape now, and it's fair. But at what cost to the country? At what cost to us, the citizens? I think those are the issues. And then the other part is also that we have also now been borrowing for consumption. And that is the sad part of it. If we're borrowing for just capital spending, yes, you can excuse that. But even capital spending, what is the procurement process like? What is the contracting process like? How transparent is the contracting process? At what rate are we implementing these infrastructure projects compared to what are being implemented even in the African continent? I think those are some of the issues that and I think some other people have with the government. But again, like I said, we have now also been borrowing for consumption. Recall that the federal government just recently, secured $800 million World Bank facility again to intervene around the subsidy removal. It says cushion the effect of subsidy removal, and then that money is going to be doled out to people in cash. It says, to help them, cope with the pains and the strains of subsidy removal. That's consumption. That's full consumption. Could there have been another way to address that? I think there could have been another way to address that, difficulty that people will face as a result of subsidy removal. Not necessarily to go and borrow, to then give out, cash to people and things like that. I think that's not what we need. If we're going to do anything around consumption, it should be from internally sourced revenue. And then if we're going to borrow, then we borrow and invest massively in the capital spending and and address the infrastructure deficits that we have. I think those are some of the issues that that needs to be addressed.
Right, because there are a majority of economists who say that tackling the spate of our borrowing and the fact that there is low revenue generation is a major concern that the next administration would have to face, especially the loan repayment processes and all of it. Now, when you look at this matter, how do you think that the incoming administration can address that? There are those who have said that perhaps we might have to look into renegotiating some of these loans.
Well, in terms of renegotiating the loans, I don't think that is feasible. Because I mean, if I'm the lending institution, for instance, and we already had an agreement, provided you recall that inflationary pressures is not just a local issue; it's a global problem. So while I provided the facility to you, I'm not going to succumb to inflationary pressure to then begin to now renegotiate the facility with you because already. Like I said, inflationary pressures are global issues. It's not just a local problem. So it will be difficult for me to then come back to the table to begin to renegotiate the interest rates, the tenor, the moratorium, and the likes. I think what we have a president-elect who is, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and he was former governor of Lagos State. I think he has his template already on what he plans to do, and I think he's done some of that. He's tested some of those policy options before in Lagos State and continues to test it, with successive governments in Lagos State. I think there's a template. And I foresee that his template will be to expand the revenue base of the country, possibly to increase, to reform the tax system, bring more people that are currently not paying or underpaying taxes into the tax net. It would then mean that you need to create some tax incentives. And see, we make, there's a saying that tax payment or tax remittance in Nigeria is one of the lowest when you look at tax to GDP. Nigeria is one of the lowest. And I don't see any reason why, taxing in Nigeria should be extremely difficult. I think what the problem is that people are not incentivized to pay tax. And the reason is because if I provide water for myself, I provide electricity for myself. I have to use inverter or to use generator or to things like that. And I have to go buy fuel to fuel my generator and there is no incentive whatsoever. Then I struggle to make all of that revenue. And at the end of the month, you then expect me to take up some of that revenue that I struggle to make, providing my own infrastructure to put my business in shape, to then give it to government to do what? So those are the issues. And I heard the president-elect, speaking at one of his forums during the campaign and saying that he is willing to provide tax incentives. And I hope that he's able to do, extend those tax incentives to small businesses because they form, the larger populace of the business community in Nigeria. Yes, the big multinationals will continue to pay, but then they all even find a way around it because they have professionals that help them to find a way around their books. But what happens to the small and medium enterprises? We need to create and ensure that we provide tax incentives for them that encourages them to pay, no matter how little their taxes are, even if it is 1 naira, they're encouraged to pay because they know they're getting something in return, from government to help their businesses. I foresee that those are some of the reforms that the president-elect will bring on board to, expand the revenue base of the country. But certainly, there are other policy options.
All right. There was a call sometime recently for that Nigeria should begin to look at the possibility of seeking debt cancellation. I wonder if Nigeria qualifies for a debt cancellation by any of its creditors or as the case may be. Shegun, are you there?
Yeah, I could not hear the last part. If you can take that again.
No, I was asking if some people are calling for debt cancellation for Nigeria. Does Nigeria qualify to seek debt cancellation at this time?
No, I think it's a lazy approach to it. It's a lazy approach to it. I mean, if you have the guts to take loans, you should have the capacity to pay back. But that's not to say that there's not the option of debt cancellation. I think where the debt cancellation issue is coming, and where African countries, including Nigeria, are hoping to leverage debt cancellation, is around the issue of the climate change issues that the West and other European countries are concerned about. And African countries, including Nigeria, are hoping that, well, if you want us to implement some of these policies, some of this policy, then there must be incentives. So it's still, again, for instance, I mean, we're talking about now incentives between countries. Recall I just spoke about the country, Nigeria government itself providing incentives to taxpayers. Now, Nigerian government is now hoping to get incentives from colleagues within the global community to say, okay, if you are going to if you are hoping that I will be able to commit to some of these policy reforms and around climate and all of that, can you also provide this leeway for us? Can you also relieve us in these areas, because these are areas that we are also concerned about. And for instance, Nigeria is hoping to tap its own energies to industrialize. So if you're then saying that Nigeria should slow down on industrialization, then what are the incentives to that? I think that's where the Nigerian government is coming in, and other African countries is coming in to say, okay, the loss and damage compensation. And then if we're going to slow down industrialization because of fossil fuel, then can you also relieve our debt burden and say, okay, yes, these are, so it's a tit for tat, but that, again, like I said, it's a lazy approach. If you have the guts to take loans, you must have the capacity to pay back. I don't question Nigeria's capacity to pay back, really, because when you look at what we're doing, for instance, in terms of oil revenue, we are underperforming. Today, as we speak, we're doing about 1.3 million barrels per day at $80 per barrel, where our quota is above 2 million barrels per day. So we have enough window to generate revenue. And then there is the non-oil sector there. There is the tax reforms there. There is the spending efficiency that we need to address. So we have enough window, but whether we have the political will, our leaders have the political will, and then can bring all the stakeholders, together. Because, for instance, if you are talking about scaling oil production, for instance, you need to look at the Niger Delta and look at what's happening there. What are the concerns of the people there? What are the concerns of the stakeholders there? Can you address those concerns so that we can pump more oil and get more revenue? Then if you need to look at, other non-oil sector, agriculture and other, you look at what's happening in the northern region of the country. What's happening with insecurity? How can we address agriculture? Those are issues that we need to address. We need someone with capacity to do that, and we're hoping that the president-elect, will be able to address some of these issues.
All right, we would need to quickly take a break. When we return, we'll continue this conversation with you, Segun. To stay with us. And Segun, one key issue that a lot of persons have been speaking about that it seems government is not really addressing is the cost of governance. A majority of persons have always spoken to this matter, that if we are to address our consumption and look at how to address our debt profile, government must look into this matter of cutting the cost of governance and also look at implementing the Orosanye report. I wonder, from your point of view, why it is seemingly challenging for us to actually address this matter and perhaps look at how we address our debts.
I mean, like I said before we went on break, is that we need political will. You see, there are too many parts of this issue about cost of governance. There's that relates to the executive arm. There is the part that relates to the legislature and other, and then of course when you scale down other tiers of government, of course you could also maybe when you look at judiciary, you could also, perhaps point out areas with which costs can be trimmed down, is that we need to be we just need to be creative about how we address this revenue debt issue. Is that, for instance, the quick wins for us to address our debt burden, like you mentioned, is that how much of revenue can we free up, and how do we free up this revenue? We're looking at subsidy removal, we're looking at tax reforms, we're looking at, and then again, the issue you just brought up, cost of governance. Now, in terms of actual cost of governance, what are the areas we can target? I think there's been the easy, points that, people have raised over the last few years. Is that, can we have, part-time legislature, for instance? Can we merge some, MDAs like, was proposed in the Orosari report to say, for instance, even when personnel are not going to be trimmed down, because, like I said, we have unemployment on our hands at more than 33%. We have poverty at more than 40%. So we are not going to, retrench people or lay people off as a result of merging ministries, departments, and agencies. We're only going to reduce operation costs, administrative and overhead costs. Those are issues that we can quickly address to free up revenue. I think, like I said, we need someone with strong political will, to come and take on some of these issues.
Public finance and policy analyst Olusegun Elemo, thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you for having me.